Mr. Joe was a man who had always prided himself in his independence. He believed in the power of hard work and self-reliance, qualities that had been instilled in him from a young age. Growing up in the heart of a bustling African village, Joe had seen firsthand how resilience and grit could transform one's life. His father, a respected farmer, had taught him that success did not come from relying on the unseen, but rather from putting one's hands to the plow and persevering against all odds. As a young man, Joe followed this principle with zeal. His business flourished, his reputation grew, and his family was provided for. Yet, as his life expanded, so did his pride. He was proud of his achievements, his self sufficiency, and his ability to overcome obstacles without the need for external help, least of all from prayer or spirituality. Hmm. In his eyes and to his imagination, those who turned to prayer and spirituality are weak, clinging to an intangible crutch to help them navigate the hardship of life. But on the other hand, Joe's wife, however, was a stark contrast to him. Though she had grown up in a similar environment, she had a deep faith in the divine. Every morning and night, she would gather their children around, her voice soft but firm as she led them in prayer. For her, the divine was not an abstract concept, but an ever present force that guided their lives. She would often urge Joe to join in, to seek guidance and protection he left for work or before any journey, because Joe was a very busy, successful, and influential businessman. But he always brushed her off and take lightly of all she does and say to him. In his words, prayers won't make the road any smoother. Joe would say, laughing dismissively, I don't need any divine intervention. The only thing I need is hard work and good judgment. But his wife, who had been married to him for over a decade, did not argue with him. She knew her husband's stubborn nature and understood that his beliefs were deeply rooted in his personal experience. Yet in her heart, she never stopped praying for him, asking for divine intervention and guidance in his life, especially for his safety during his frequent travels. This was a practice she had adhered to without fail, despite Joe's continuous disregard for her beliefs. Every time he left for a trip, whether it was a short visit to the market or a long journey to his village, she would whisper a prayer asking the Creator to keep him safe. She did so quietly, without complaint, never voicing her concerns for his safety. But it wasn't easy, for in her heart she knew that there were forces in the world that could not be controlled with mere human strength. And one of those forces was the unseen spiritual realm, where battles were fought that could not be seen with the physical eyes. She stopped voicing out her concerns to Joe because he made ridicule of her belief and he threatened to stop her from even worshipping and being dedicated in her belief. So she silently prays for him often and never voiced it out to him in order to avoid a spark up of disagreement, conflict, and mockery from him. So it happened that one fateful morning, Joe received a letter from his village inviting him to the annual village festival. It was a tradition he had looked forward to every year, a time where families reunited and the community celebrated their shared heritage. His heart leaped with excitement. He hadn't been home in several months and was eager to reconnect with his roots. The journey was long, involving treacherous roads, though dense forest was unpredictable, weather and rough terrain. But Joe had made this trip countless times before, and each time he had returned without accident. This time, however, things were different. His wife, noticing his enthusiasm, was immediately struck with an uneasy feeling. She watched as he packed his bags, whistling happily, oblivious to the concerns that weighed heavily on her heart. As he finished preparing, she gently placed her hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eye. "Joe, please," she begged, her voice trembling slightly. "I know you are excited to go home, but please take a moment to pray before you leave. Ask for protection on the road." Joe turned to her, his expression one of mild irritation, mixed with amusement. "Oh, not again," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "We've been through this 1,000 times. I don't need prayers. I've got this under control. It's just a simple drive, for goodness sake." But his wife was undeterred. She gently took his hand and placed it in hers, looking at him with a deep, almost pleading gaze. "Please, Joe," she said swiftly. "I've been praying for you every day since we've been married, and I'll keep praying for you. But I beg you, for your own safety, pray before you go." Joe felt a tug in his heart, a flicker of hesitation, but he quickly brushed it off. "There's no need for all this," he said. "I will be fine. Don't worry so much." With that he left, confident in his own ability and unbothered by the pleas of his wife. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and waved goodbye at his wife and children. As he sped off towards the road that would take him back to his village, his wife stood in the doorway watching him go, a deep sadness clouding her face. She knew her husband's heart, and she feared that this would be a journey that would change everything. But she had no choice but to trust her prayers and believe that despite his stubbornness, Joe would be protected. The journey was uneventful at first. Joe cruised along the well-worn path, enjoying the familiar sight of the rolling hills, the tall grasses swaying in the wind, and the occasional village dotting the landscape. He couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as the open road stretched before him. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and everything seemed perfect. He was sure that this would be just another trip in a long line of uneventful ones. He felt no need for anything beyond his own skill and experience. But as the day wore on, the weather began to change. Dark clouds appeared on the horizon, and a chill wind started to blow. Joe didn't think much of it. He had driven through storms before and always came out the other side unscratched. This time, however, the storm seemed to grow stronger by the minute. The sky darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall, slow at first, then quickly intensifying into a torrential downpour. The truck's windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the relentless rain as the road grew slick and muddy beneath his tires. Joe gripped the steering wheel tightly, cursing under his breath as he tried to navigate the worsening conditions. He could barely see ahead of him, the rain blurring his vision, but he refused to slow down. He had always prided himself on his ability to push through adversity. A little rain wasn't going to stop him now. The storm seemed to grow even more violent, and soon the road was barely visible. Swallowed by the torrents of rain and swirling winds, Joe's truck began to slide uncontrollably. the tires unable to find traction on the slippery ground. Panic slowly began to rise in his chest as he realized that he might not be able to keep control of the vehicle, but he pressed on stubbornly, trying to push through the storm, convinced that he could handle it. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A sudden powerful gust of wind struck the truck, causing it to swerve violently off the road. Joe struggled to gain control, but it was too late. The truck skidded into a deep ditch, flipping over the coming of an abrupt stop. For a moment, everything was still. Then the sounds of the storm, the howling wind, and the pounding rain flooded back into the scenes. Joe was shaking but alive. His heart raced as he tried to collect himself. He was trapped miles away from help in the middle of a storm that showed no sign of letting up. The truck's engine sputtered and died, and as he tried to get out, he realized that he was alone. He had no phone signal, no way to call for help, and no idea where he was. Fear began to grip him. He had always believed that he could handle anything on his own, but now he realized how powerless he truly was. It was then that he felt a strange sensation, as if something unseen was watching him, something beyond his understanding. He couldn't explain it, but he felt the presence of something greater than him. And this brought back his memory to the feeling of a presence and a thought he had when his wife was pleading with him to pray before embarking on the journey. He had dismissed her faith, her belief in something higher, and now he found himself in a situation where his own strength and determination were no match for the forces at work around him. And Joe had no choice than to acknowledge the supremacy of God. Joe had no choice than to freely open up his heart and acknowledge his weakness. He found himself muttering words because he couldn't put his words together. As a result of the thoughts, the regrets, the imaginations, and so many other things running through his mind, he regretted how he treated his wife. He felt sorry about not praying. He felt so much terrible for trusting his ability, knowing fully well that he was not the one that created himself. Therefore, he must be submitted under a supreme and a supernatural power. So he prayed and accepted Christ into his heart. He also prayed for mercy and prayed that the Supreme Lord will send him help. And that was how Job was delivered. Though he believed that the little prayer he prayed was not what delivered him, but the consistent prayer of his wife right from when they got wedded has been his strong support and stronghold. And now he saw the need why he should pray often, be more spiritual and more dedicated and more committed, so that in times like this, the Supreme Lord will always come through for him. What do you think about Joe? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. Are you also in a situation like Joe, where you feel you have the power to do things? You are a successful business person, money flows in and out, and you feel it is because you have been resilient, you've been hardworking, you've been smart, you've been consistent, that is making everything to flow rightly for you. Then you have to sit down and have a rethink, because being spiritual is not being clingy, it's not being frustrated and hopeless, it's being submitted under the supremacy of God, so that you will not be cut short. If this story inspires you, please hit on the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you'll be among the first people to get notified when we upload new content.